Everyone, it is me, TVP, and I'm here to bring you an interesting showcase on a set that I've already actually completed by this point. It is Legend of Blue Eyes from the YGO2MTG project. Now, to explain, I started a project starting all the way back to Legend of Blue Eyes in order to try to translate, but not necessarily direct translate, a good number of the Yu-Gi-Oh cards that existed in when it was released. This includes, notably, unreleased Japan-only cards, as well as stuff that was in like tournament packs, etc. Without further ado, let's just go ahead and dive right into the set. Of course, we have a card in front of us that is a field type, and this is something that is exclusive to Yu-Gi-Oh! To MTG. The field type was used as a way to denote something that was a field spell without necessarily taking away the fact that it is realistically just a land in the case of Magic the Gathering. So here we have a really interesting card. Ancient Forest enters tapped unless you control a green permanent. You can see I'm already using the newer wording that was released relatively recently, actually, with the release of Bloomburrow. And it also has the ability to tap for green. Finally, it has the channel ability, which costs 2 to discard it and search your library for a basic land card, reveal it, put it in your hand, and shuffle. These are, without a doubt, some of the best lands that you can get access to in the limited environment, and does actually come up a good number of times in Constructed, depending on what kind of deck you're running. Ancient Forest and its kin are very good lands overall. Always a fan of pulling these relatively as early picks as well. I'm just going to go ahead and search up the rest of them so you can see. Canyon is another one of those. And again, this is a card. This is actually a card from a further ahead set, but I did do myself a personal favor of having the ability to at least pull some designs into the pulling some designs into the like past, basically, because I do think Canyon would have been a great name for a card in the original Yu-Gi-Oh sets. Of course, we actually have Fire Prison as another example of that. Mystic Plasma Zone. Mythical Umi is one of the other sets of lands. We'll showcase those a little bit later. But as you can see, there's a full set of 6 of the field the channel field lands at common. Now I'm sure you've noticed this, but there's also another land type here. Or not land type, but land. And as you can see, is the drifting lands. Drifting lands are awesome. Some of the best playing lands that I've ever designed, and they are in a special slot. This is what I call internally the constructed slot, but of course during draft it's just a special rarity slot where you can pull pretty much only the special rarity cards. Drifting Field has the upside of being able to tap for white mana on the turn that you play it, but of course you lose a life unless you control a white permanent, so there is a downside to playing this. Now, of course, you can also tap it to choose a color, but you can only activate it once while it's on the field, and you can tap to add a mana of the chosen color. So you can treat it like a tap land, and in that case, a dual land, with the downside of losing a life on one half. But the real truth is that it's very good for aggro decks to just be able to, put these down, lose some life, and just really get down on the field with the mana that you need. And of course, if you need different colors of mana, taking a turn off, when it's at your best convenience to do so, helps out a lot. And of course, there is a full suite of them, Drifting Peak, Mire, Jungle, Isle, Crevasse as well, and there is a final one which is Drifting Sands. This one has the ability to choose a color any number of times. Of course, it just depends on how many turns you have, so if you're taking 6 full turns to tap this, I mean, you do you have all 6 colors of mana. Of course, where would we be for Yu-Gi-Oh! If we did not mention the fact that rare cards exist? And in the rarity rare section, as you can see, I have it organized by mana value. Why don't we just go ahead and click on something that I'm sure most people are thinking about when they think of Yu-Gi-Oh! Legend of Blue Eyes is known for having the, face card, Blue Eyes White Dragon. So as you can see here, I have a sort of rule, and one of the biggest rules of this is that there are no legendary cards outside of something like, say, Exodia, right? And that is just kind of to keep to the natural feel of the game originally. The original game didn't have legendaries outside of some specific cards, but those are usually determined by this sense of you can only really run one of it in your deck because you're literally limited to only one in your deck. Blue Eyes Red Dragon has just is a kind of follows what it used to do in the game. Just a big beater, has, in this case, a way to heal you back life. Notably, it doesn't heal you the same amount of life that you deal, but that is intentional. I've noticed that lifelink as a keyword tends to swing games a lot more than people realize. Um, so I opted for something else, which is healing. Pretty simple. You gain the amount of life that it deals damage for. So notably, too, if you find a way to make Blue Eyes White Dragon deal a single point of damage to something else, you do gain 4 life from that as well. And of course, Dark Magician is another example of this. Dark Magician has a different kind of thing, though. This is another set that has both Silver and the Sanctum, and actually, this was the one that was completed prior to Frontiers of Eternity being worked on. Although they were kind of worked on simultaneously, Legend of Blue Eyes was finished first. And notably, because of this, there are a good number of cards that I have marked as air quotes, um, air quotes mistakes, is what I'll point it out. But you kind of need them. I'll be real. And those mistakes are mostly in Silver specifically because I'm still working. When I was finishing up Legend of Blue Eyes, I was still working on the color pie for it. I was still working on what it can and can't do, but I wasn't going to let that stop me from finishing the set. I think it was worth, finishing the set out, really getting an idea for what it does and why it does what it does, and just get more opportunities to play test it. I think that goes underrepresented is that in order to properly understand what you're doing, the best way to do that is to simply, play with it, use it, interact with it. And if you're just sitting there theory crafting for 40 years straight, you're not really going to get anywhere. So cards like Dark Magician are testing out, well, what can you do with the Sanctum, right? In this case, when it enters or attacks, you can cast a card from your hand or Sanctum with mana value 5 or less without paying its costs. That is quite strong. However, it really is the question of what can you get, what does matter in that context. And of course, in order to see that, you actually have to see what can start in the Sanctum in this set. So, without further ado, we are going to mention the first mechanic actually of the set, which is we actually did already introduce the other one. That is channel, and channel will be a staple of all of the Yu-Gi-Oh to MTG projects. I do actually think the channel is like the perfect analog for Yu-Gi-Oh to Magic as like discarding from hand to do stuff. Fusion. Of course, maybe Armored Starfish wasn't the best example here, but I do really enjoy the work that I had to do to put in order to create Fusion as a mechanic. It's quite simple, thankfully. It just states that you can cast a card from your Sanctum by also sacrificing a non-land permanent that shares a creature type with this and discarding a card. So in order to play a fusion creature from your Sanctum, which of note you only get one copy of in your Sanctum, you can have up to 7 cards in your Sanctum. All of them have to be unique, and that is also again, that's another thing too as well. I think I did most of the development for the Sanctum as well in Yu-Gi-Oh to MTG, and learning a lot about how I wanted Sanctums to function because of this Legend of Blue Eyes set. And what's really notable is not being able to load up on 4 copies of the same fusion did change a lot of how the designs got to be. Armored Starfish is a great example of a card that you really wouldn't want somebody to have 4 copies of. Now, of course, the downside is pretty big, having to sacrifice a creature of the same type, like creature type, as well as discarding a card from hand, that's a pretty big downside. And of course, they can counterspell it, they can interact with it, and you can really just throw off your advantage. It can just destroy you. But at the same time, if you have a powerful fusion and they don't have interaction, well, what are they going to do? If you play 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 copies, if you play more past the first, at least once you've played the first, it's a little bit more of a well, they had this card, they were building around this card. There's a reason why this card was in their deck, in their Sanctum specifically, and their deck was built around it. But in the context of, putting down a third or fourth copy of, like, again, the only example you have is Armored Starfish, it gets a little bit oppressive. It just turns every top deck into, well, I guess they're just getting another Armored Starfish down. And of course, there's quite a lot of examples of different cards that work from the Sanctum Fusion being a really cool mechanic as well. And I do think that from where we've gotten design-wise, um, it's really changed a lot about how this set functions, but that's a good thing. Card advantage is a big thing, and that is something that I translated directly over from Yu-Gi-Oh! Without even realizing it, I did it, because Fusion does require you to keep a good handle on the number of cards in your hand, as well as the creatures that you have in the field. A great card that actually pulls you ahead is a card like Flower Wolf. You sack a creature, discard a card, and you get a 4/4 trample and basically draw 2 cards, right? That would put you at a +1 in advantage, and that is something that I want to have happen, but I don't want it to happen early. That's why you see a card like Flame Ghost does give you multiple bodies, but at the same time, it isn't necessarily giving you advantage. You're still going down a card. You still had to have played something on turn 1. That card either had to attack that turn or turn 2, and then you sacrifice it, or you had to immediately sacrifice it. So there's a lot of investment, there's a lot of moving parts that gets this down on turn 2 every single time. Now, Fusion is a great mechanic, and of course, this just means that the rest of the set really has to keep up, right? Because if you've got a mechanic like Fusion in the set, well, what else is going on in it? And that's the interesting thing about the set. For the most part, it is just Channel and Fusion as the 2 biggest pieces of mechanics. Notably, there is a third mechanic. In the file right now, unfortunately, yeah, unfortunately in the file right now, there was a bit of a bug that I had to fix, and I hadn't gotten around to fixing the cards yet, which, it is something that happens over time. You do eventually come to the realization that something is a problem, but we do have the prototype box here, and that is because there's another mechanic called Unbound. So Unbound's really cool, and is a way to keep advantage on your side by giving you a bigger creature without needing to spend a card. And this is something that is incredibly relevant, especially if you're going into your Sanctum a lot to use fusions, right? If you're trying to put down a lot of fusions, or at the very least, if you're trying to put down 1 or 2, you still need to make sure you have enough cards in hand, you're still playing lands, and Unbound gives you an opportunity to not lose card advantage, but to get a better creature. And of course, we have here Stone Ghost. Now, how does Unbound work? So you play your initial card first. You can either play the card first onto the field. So for this example, Stone Ghost is a 1 mana 2/1, pretty strong stat line, especially in red. But of course, it has its downsides. It doesn't really have any extra upside really anywhere. And there is a point where I've considered actually nerfing this card a little bit by giving it a downside. That will come to testing, and that's something that we've been looking at to see whether or not that needs to change. But in this case, you've played your 1 mana 2/1, and at any time, or at least anytime you have priority, no, sorry, during your main phases, while there's nothing on the stack, you can pay 5 mana to get a 4/2. And that this is the interesting thing about Unbound. That both changes its size, which means it goes from a 2/1 to a 4/2, but it also changes its mana cost. So it's no longer a 1 mana creature card on the battlefield. It is a 5 mana creature card. And of course, that does matter quite a lot, especially for cards that are, keying off of stuff like that. Of course, in the graveyard, they're always going to be the same mana value as when you initially cast them, but you can also cast them unbound as well, so there is that upside as well. Let's see if I can show you another card that I think is very interesting in terms of Unbound. Let's just pull up the list. Ah, right. Red Eyes Black Dragon. So I'm also sure you've noticed, but there is a little bit of a tag up top where it says Red Eyes. Also, there's a thing I need to fix, but hey, comes with the program. Um, that is done in the case of something that I may do in the future, which is potentially using Yu-Gi-Oh like logic, where you can pull cards from a specific archetype without needing the name of the card. Instead, it's just pulling from this tag here. Of course, that does get further away from how Magic the Gathering works, but I do think it's worth at least exploring. And as right now, it doesn't have any mechanical advantages. There's no difference to, a card with red eyes in its text up here versus not. That being said, Red Eyes Black Dragon is a great example of how to push a mechanic. And oh boy, this card is fantastic in control mirrors, it's fantastic in longer games, and it's also just a good card to try to race. For 3 mana, you get a 3/2 Flash Flyer, which is already fantastic rate wise. Um, just being able to put that down on the field and really get pressure on your opponent, especially when they might have tapped out the prior turn trying to answer something else that you've already played out. Getting a 3/2 in the air, that puts a clock on your opponent pretty quickly. Now, especially with the drifting lands running around too. Now, the big part about this is the fact that you can cast it from your graveyard. It does cost you 7 mana, and it does cost you 2 creatures. But at instant speed, I would like to note, you can slam a 6/4 from your graveyard, and I think that will win you games. Now, point of this is to point out that there are designs again in the set that are trying to really pull a feel of what the card represents as a concept rather than just trying to make something that is powerful based on what it did in Yu-Gi-Oh! Because if you try to follow what Yu-Gi-Oh! Does, you're going to end up with a lot of really just bad designs. And that's something that I wanted to avoid. I didn't want to do exactly what Yu-Gi-Oh! Did. Because what Yu-Gi-Oh! Has is a different problem. It doesn't have a mana system. It only has normal summons as its only real resource, and even that gets subverted a good number of times. So it's important to recognize, especially when you're making a product or project that is trying to emulate or even pull designs from other games, you have to remember that resource systems and the logic that they follow does have to change, and your logic has to change as well. Because if you try to, one-to-one throw something in, you're going to have a lot of problems. I think it is also worth showing off. Let's see here. I did have a next pick here. Right. That is because the next one is Forbidden One. And let me just say, this has got to be the funniest set of cards that I've made. You might not think it, but a 1-drop 1/1 that surveils 2 as a legendary card is actually good, or at least better than you'd initially assume. Getting early deck filtering is something that I've noticed has mattered quite a lot in this limited environment, as well as the constructed playtesting that we've done. I've noticed that there is just a lot more strength in it than you'd initially assume, as well to throw a bunch of cards in your graveyard. This is almost a Stitcher supplier, at least on the enters ability. So there's also that to look at. But it also gives you a good amount of, like I said, card filtering, and that's all of them doing that, except for the head, obviously. Now, the funniest thing about this is, while there isn't a one per deck restriction, the legendary here does kind of mirror that. Then there's Exodia, the Forbidden One. So, why did I go with this implementation? And the answer is kind of complex, but kind of simple. I felt that the way that Exodia works in Yu-Gi-Oh! Is awesome. Okay? Great design for a game that has no resource systems and a really fun way, at least on your end. We don't know about the opponent, although I guess, dying to Exodia isn't exactly the worst thing to happen. But being the being the way that it works in that game is awesome and great for that game. But I didn't feel that it was correct to try to translate that directly. Instead, I decided to do a different approach. So, since I know Magic the Gathering as a concept will have you, playing out your cards, getting your advantage, interacting with your opponents, I didn't want the effect to go and look at your graveyard as well because I felt like that would just be really, what's the word? It would just be really obnoxious and not really the spirit of the card. Once it goes to your graveyard, you gotta get it back in your hands somehow. That's how original Yugi or how original Exodia worked. So instead, I went with the implementation that you have to get it on the battlefield. Now, this does bring up reanimation strategies, which means that you can reanimate it and potentially throw a bunch of the pieces onto the field at the same time, or have them already on the field and then reanimate this the following turn. You've got a lot of options on how to make that happen, and I think that it is a good thing that these are options in the first place rather than it just being, whoops, I showed my hand and I have all 5 pieces. Again, great for a game that doesn't have a resource system, excluding the cards in hand. Bad for a game that does have a resource system that explicitly has multiple different ways for context to work. So again, I did mention that the set does have, very low number of mechanics. I'm not really sure if Illuminous shows up here at all, but I can show off the next interesting thing about the set, and that is the rarity special. I don't think I typed that in right, so let's try that again. Special. All right. So again, what is the point of the special rarity slot? I think that's the best question that you might have. And it really does just break down to being an opportunity to try to design things from a more I'm directly trying to make this for constructed standpoint, right? You're putting cards that you kind of expect to get somewhere, as well as reprints from other sets, which is something that I really found interesting um, as a way to do this set. I felt like really pulling designs from the community was the way to go because, for example, we have Sunscorched Tempering, which is from Port Noon, which is designed by Kagane, which is also the co-creator of Legend of Blue Eyes as well as Frontiers of Eternity. He's been a great help and kind of the reason why a lot of the balance decisions get made for this set. These two are from, if you saw the last video, these two are actually from Frontiers of Eternity. Notably, this got a name change and this got a change, so there's still things that are in this file that aren't updated, but that's fine. This also got changed because Launcher Spider I realized is mono red unblockable, and that was not fair. In the color pie sense, as well as Ignal Score Witch being incorrectly costed. So again, there's always going to be mistakes, but the key part as well is to play with them, learn what they are, and really just try to fix them as you go and fix them as you encounter them and understand what they mean so you don't have to experience it again in the future. Gradius is a great example of a card, by the way, that really let silver as a color shine. It is a powerful card in the sense that it really does give you some advantages against graveyard-based decks. It gives you advantages as just a 1-mana 1/1 haste flyer. It can give you a board if you know the card that was released in Modern Horizons 3. I can't think of the name of it. I don't want to say Nakatl. It is a small cat, 1-mana 1/1 lifelinker, and at the beginning of your end step, if you gain life this turn, you make a 1/1, and it has additional text because it has Ascend as well. But this is an example of a 1-drop that really allowed me to test what what a color can do, and that's what the point of this slot was. Really wanted to push designs to try to see where they can go. Cap Avenger is another example of that. You get a 4-mana 2/3, which is pretty bad, to be honest with you. But when you can cast it for 2, because you have 8 or more cards in your graveyard, suddenly, 2-mana 4/3 sounds a heck of a lot better. As well as just having it trigger whenever it becomes a target of a spell or ability, you can make any player mill 5. That turns your self-mill deck into just a mill deck to start to get your opponent dead. without necessarily needing to swing in with your 4/3. And overall, again, like I said, the set has cameos from other sets, Into the Unknown being one from Ynire, made by Fungustober, Deathly Bellow being by Patches for ERM, and you just get, and this is from uh, original Vinroth Eternities, which is a set that you guys will likely not see for a good amount of time. There's still a lot of work that I want to do. It is the first set that I have ever created, and I will eventually showcase that. If you actually look prior to this video here, you can actually see a few of the designs from the original Vinroth Eternities, and the work that I put in there really did give me the opportunity to go a heck of a lot further in the designs. Um, but with that, I would like to say I'll see you guys later. Thank you for your time. And of course, if you're ever interested in seeing more videos like this, leave a comment, drop a like if you can. Let me know that you actually enjoy this. And if there's something that you're interested in that maybe I didn't cover, let me know. As well as there's something you don't like, it's a great idea to let me know as well. But it has been a great time. Thank you all, and I'll see you later.